Forward, and that's back.
Okay. We'll see how that works. Okay, so those of you who noticed my awesome shirt at breakfast, I ran into a friend of mine at the IETF. I know. Pretty exciting, huh? It has 3 options, off, on, and auto, and I'm not entirely sure what auto means, but it's a little scary. Anyway, I hadn't seen her in a really long time, and I lost track of her, but she was hiding in plain sight working with David Huberman. Who knew? Anyway, it was super fun. So I just want to take a little poll. Who was in path of totality for the eclipse? Wasn't it the coolest thing ever? Yes. I didn't leave my neighborhood, so that was pretty awesome as well. So, oh, there's slides there. Okay, cool. Anyway, so much for that. Okay, that didn't work. Where am I?
Green button.
Next slide, please. We do that at the IETF. It's very high tech. So about this presentation, it's actually official, even though for 6 years it wasn't official. And I don't know, maybe I'll just delete this slide for next time. But I like really weird quotes. I take pictures of people when they don't see me doing it. And anybody who is there who has any input is welcome to pipe up and say what I've gotten wrong or that you don't like my awesome shirt. Anyway, let's see. Next slide, please. Because there's, oh, I don't know what that was about. Can we go back? Because this worked. Okay. These are some highlights. I finally got to put a picture of the fountain at the Kafka Museum in my presentation because the social event was there. Anyway, you can peruse that later. So highlights. I wasn't at the quick meeting, but I had some conversations during the meeting about it, and I went back and watched the video of it, but things are really changing, you guys. So quick is a UDP, it's a new transport for the internet over UDP, and the BOF for this, the first time, was last summer, July of 2016, and there are 5 interoperable implementations now that were at the hackathon in July this year. So the internet, as we know it, is really changing. Pretty soon, we won't be using TCP. Rudiger is stabbing himself or something back there. For better or for worse, this is, we may notice, we may not notice, but this is a huge change and it's happening. I mean, 5 interoperable implementations in a year is pretty amazing. Nothing happens that fast, so in the IETF anyway. So something to keep an eye on would be that. I have some other things that I'm going to talk about as the presentation goes along that are intertwined in the rest of my presentation that are also highlights. But that's really something to pay attention to. So, oh, it works now. So John and the board let me go to the Advanced Networking Research Workshop. I've been always really fascinated with the winners of the whole contest. But I went and I listened to a bunch of the presentations on Saturday because, you might as well stay an extra Saturday inside in Prague instead of being outside. And they were really interesting. A lot of research gets done because of the RIPE Atlas probes. I have 1 of 2 in Wyoming. So if you're interested in traffic in Wyoming, it's at my house. But there's a lot of really interesting work that was presented that people are taking the data. And this whole vantage point selection thing is how do you pick which RIPE probes to use to get the most information for what research you're trying to do, so it's research about how to do research with RIPE Atlas, which was a pretty interesting talk. Let's see. Wow, I can't even hardly read these. There isn't a thing up here, is there? No. Okay, awesome. Let's see. So these are some more of the presentations that happened at the Advanced Networking Research Forum. The ones of note, there's a lot of implementation going on with segment routing in v6. There's a lot of testing going on for different varying forms of happy eyeballs, like how well is your v6 working, that sort of thing. Let's see. And then our own Leslie Daigle did a health metrics panel with some ISPs that was pretty interesting. And I like the opportunities for optimization quote, like, well, maybe we have V6 and V4 both running, but the V6 thing is like on the other side of the earth, and maybe if it was closer, it would be better. So, as time goes on, these ISPs have looked at, like, how do we make it so that they're more, the connectivity is similar enough, or maybe it's better with V6, but not having it be worse. So that was it's all videoed if you want to check it out. It was actually a pretty good panel. Let's see. And then these are some other papers I won't go into because I'm sure you all want your coffee break, but if you're interested, they're all online as well. So IEPG, like I always say, it's the operator forum that happens the day before the IETFs that no one at the IETF seems to know is happening. But it's been happening for like 20 years, and it's usually it's my favorite part of the IETF, so I always go Sunday from 10 to noon. So let's see. Exploring the network data for fun and profit, which was, George is always, is he here? If you can ask him, he's over there about his presentation. With HTTPS deployed fairly ubiquitously, who's left behind? And he has some stats about the predictors of who can't do secure HTTP. So you should check that out. Automatic DNSSEC, and there's some implementations. Is that like a voice or something? Anyway, some implementations of automatic DNSSEC and the domains that are signed and not signed. There's some stats here for that. So it's happening.
How do you know something's been signed if there's no published DS record?
Let's see if I can go back. I'm not entirely sure.
I think it's read the RFC time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a high-level presentation. No, that's okay. Sometimes I know.
My guess would be that it finds the relevant resource records in the zone,
Yeah.
even though it can't validate them against the upstream DS.
Let's see. And then there was a talk about BGP more specifics, the three kinds, hole punching for traffic engineering or just hole punching, more specific overlays, and that 53% of BGP more specifics are, I'm sorry, I just had a huge loss of my thought process there. Are more specific. So a lot of the routing table in BGP is still more specifics. Let's see. And 1% of the prefixes generate 40% of the updates, which isn't a huge surprise. That's been that way for a really long time. And V6 has a lot more instability still in the routing table, even though the routing table for V6 is smaller. So. And these are some other projects that are going on that were presented in the IEPG. Let's see. And then this is about DNS recursives and how to analyze their behavior and look at what could be fixed. And it looks like in a lot of cases, using Anycast more ubiquitously really helps the recursives behave. So, and there's some slides that you can get to at that URL. Let's see. So IRTF. So this was singularly, I think, the most interesting part of IETF this time were these two presentations at the IRTF. So there were two winners of the Advanced Networking Research Prize. And seriously, if you get a chance, read these papers. They're amazing. So the first one is all about carrier-grade NAT deployment. And they used, again, BitTorrent. There's this, you look at your BitTorrent neighbor, and then you can extrapolate where all these carrier-grade NATs are. It's really pretty fascinating, and they looked at how much carrier-grade NAT is going on, and it's really pretty significant. They also found that a lot of what I presented a few reports back where people are snarfing up address space that isn't routed and using it as RFC 1918 space, they saw a bunch of that in these carrier-grade NATs. Anyway, it was super well presented and really, really interesting. And the second paper, which I can't even believe it. So there's this big security flaw in the Juniper software. Well, actually, there were two of them. And this guy did this whole analysis of what happened, what went wrong, the whole calamity of errors that made these security things happen. And it was just really interesting. Like halfway through the presentation, a guy in the back of the room just went, "Oh," out loud. Like I don't think he realized. Like all of a sudden you're just like, "No, that didn't happen." Like the new version of Ike, the nonce is bigger, and that made it easier to hack to do the hack. It's really worth reading and watching the presentation if you get a chance, especially if you're into security, because it's just, like that loop didn't get implemented, so this check never happened, and then it was just a whole calamity of errors. So anyway, I was really geeking out over that one. So V6 Man, not nearly as exciting. But super exciting that IPv6 is now an official internet standard. Isn't that exciting? Yay! Who knew? Who knew it would someday happen, that we've been doing this for how long and now it's official? Let's see what else. They're talking about addressing architecture, which affects this community, I guess. I mean, they say a prefix length should be a certain prefix length, and we say a prefix length should be a certain prefix length, and I'm not really sure why it can't just be a net and a mask, but we're still having discussions about it. Let's see. There's node requirements still happening, and these are some of the other drafts being worked on in 6-man, if you're interested. HomeNet, again, hasn't changed much, the host node configuration protocol. So Ted, one of the guys, he implemented it in his house, and he said it was really, really, really super hard, and that somebody in their home probably wouldn't be able to do that very easily, and then everybody got upset with him because 19-year-olds can deploy that stuff. So anyway, I think it really needs to be easier for stuff to work in the home, not harder. And if an IETF guy can't make it work, then I suppose that, my brother can't. I don't know, but more will be revealed, I guess. Let's see. So they're still working on Babel or whatever, the routing protocol they created for HomeNet, which I still don't understand why we need another routing protocol for HomeNet. But they're still working on it, and different turns of the spec. And these are some of the other drafts that I won't talk about. CIDR operations is the security for the routing. And so there's a easy ROA validator now that you can use that tells you if your ROA is valid or not, which is pretty cool. And I like that quote because blockchain is all hip and cool. But anyway, so if you want to check on your ROAs and see if they're valid, there's a roaalert.org. So you can check it out. Some other drafts that are going on in there. There's a tree validator that is being worked on. Let's see what else. There's a BGPsec reference implementation being updated. So there's some stuff going on there. V6 operations. Okay, so this is where I ran into my friend Justine, and she gave me this awesome shirt. So this is what's going on at turning off V4 at Microsoft. The guy who gave the presentation, he talked quite a bit about the reasons why they're doing V6 only. They ran out of RFC 1918. They need to interoperate with other parts of the company. The NAT solutions aren't good enough for them, and dual stack is really a lot of work for them, so they're doing a lot of V6 only work. And so he has a blog that he wrote about it as well, and the link is there. So, let's see. And here's some stats about V6 deployment status. So there are 9 million, I so can't read my slides from here. So anyway, check those out. There's 37 countries exceeding 5% traffic, which is pretty cool. Akamai says there are 7 countries whose V6 traffic exceeds 15%. So we're moving along with the deployment. And now that it's an internet standard, who knew? Maybe it'll even go faster, right? Could happen. What was that? Let's see. So there's a bunch of work, again, being done with Happy Eyeballs. Oh, so this guy, what he's suggesting that happens, so say you send a request and you get your quad A record back before you get your A record. If you're dual stack, why don't you just do V6 and not wait for the V4? So they're trying to optimize some of these things so that, well, if V6 is faster, why don't you just use it? So that's being worked on. Let's see. Oh, and then there's a huge discussion about the IETF, as we say, eating its own dog food. So, maybe we should have a V6 only network at the IETF, but then people complain that they want to get real work done, so they don't really want that. So there's a big argument about that going on right now. Like when does the IETF start using V6 itself? I mean, there is a 6-to-4 network and a V4 network and a V6 network, but when is it going to be V6 with, maybe a little V4 on the side? It's not quite happening yet. So, and the other thing is that, so you go to electronics store A and you buy a box and you bring it home and you plug it in and V4 works, right? It just works. But you buy one that does V6 and you have to still jump through a whole bunch of hoops. So there's some work being discussed about how to make that happen, where you just get a V6 box and you bring it home and you plug it in and it just works. So, and obviously Ted, when he did the HomeNet thing, that didn't work so well. So hopefully we can make it simpler to be able to do V6 just out of the box. Let's see. Yeah, they're still talking about unique local addresses and whether we should use them or not. More Happy Eyeballs stuff. Let's see. There's some other drafts going on in V6. V6 ops, you could spend forever going over them. So I went to the ops area meeting, which is sort of an overarching whatever doesn't fit in an individual ops group. It goes to ops area, and then maybe it stays there, or maybe it moves to whichever group it ends up being put in. And so some of this, they talked about versioning and structure of specifications. And I just don't think that using a Yang model to structure IETF drafts is going to be super exciting, but I don't know. So there's a big discussion about the specifications themselves and what format, even though there is a new format, which I think I have a slide about. What other work's being discussed is right here: service models, exporting BGP community information, more Yang models, feel like Yang models. So the ISA-BOF is about the interaction between the IETF and Internet Society, and so there's some work being done. How does the IETF fit into the Internet Society? If you ask them, it's what did they call it? An activity of the Internet Society, but I think maybe the IETF might want it to be more than that, or they might form like a separate staff. So there's some work being done on that. So this is the other thing. This is in my highlight slide. I have a friend that I've been doing some work with at the IETF, and I went to a meeting about TLS. And TLS is transport layer security. It's never been kind of my thing. I go there for IPv6. But this is actually something that's changing along with QUIC and some of the other stuff that's happening. And there's a huge group of data center people that are really worried about the new transport layer security because they're not going to be able to look in the packets and see what's wrong with their networks. And so they're trying to push to have this Diffie-Hellman that they can look at, they can open up the packets and see what's broken in the data center. So if you do data center stuff, this might be something you might want to follow, because if you can no longer debug problems, then that might be kind of hard to do your job. So there's a group that has been meeting pretty regularly. I went to their group on some ridiculous hour in the morning before the meeting, and then I went to the working group, and there's actually, so TLS version 3 or 1.3 is the new version, and that's the one where it's going to be really hard to look into the packets. And so the data centers want to use, like I said, a static Diffie-Hellman so that they can look into the packets and see what's broken in their networks. So anyway, it's something that might affect a lot of you. I don't really know, but it seemed like there were a number of big company data center people that were there that were pretty up in arms. So let's see. Yeah, so this is more about the static Diffie-Hellman and the requirements that people need. So dynamic host configuration is all the DHCP v6 stuff. So here's some stats on DHCP v6 deployment. Let's see, 99% of 44 million cable modems use DHCP v6 for v6 and are v6 only. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that these guys, the Comcast guys, are really taking v6 as an opportunity to completely change how they build their network, how they run their network, how they think about running their network. And it's really kind of neat because they're freed up. You don't have to split nodes anymore and remove little bits of address space around. You can just give it a bunch of address space and then make it all work. And so they're really changing the paradigm of how you build your network out and what you use address space for. So anyway, let's see. There's work being done on secure DHCP v6, but it's not working super full speed ahead. So this is the Global Internet for Everyone working group. I've been going to a couple of these. And these are some community networks, guys. Community networks that are doing, building infrastructure in varying different remote places. So maybe we could get some of them to come and join the community networks discussion. I didn't even think of that till just now. Anyway, I went to the technical plenary, and I just want to say that on September 14th, 2017, the first RFC was published with non-ASCII characters. I know. Nothing before its time. No more ASCII art, which is super cool. For those of you who don't know, you used to have to do network diagrams with dashes and strange characters and little... So Heather, the RFC editor, was instrumental in that, and she has a lot of patience, an incredible amount of patience. And again, I said there's a number of discussions about the IETF network being v6 by default. So I went to the human rights consideration working group as well, because I just find it fascinating, as it's not going now. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. And guess who gave the presentation? Milton Mueller, which was good to see him. I haven't seen him in a while. He used to be on the advisory council for 3 years or 6 years or something. So he talked about internet architecture and human rights, which was a really great talk if you get a chance to listen to it. Is code law or is code the enabler of human rights, and those sorts of questions. Like the press and the radio were technologies of freedom until everybody figured out how to regulate them, and that's sort of kind of what's happening with the internet. Like it was a free and open thing, and then once you figure out how you can clamp down on that stuff, you start clamping down on that stuff. So it was a really interesting discussion, and I was glad I was there. If you get a chance, check it out. Let's see. Next slide. So this is a couple of the ongoing drafts, politics of standards and architecture, how internet architecture enables human rights. Next slide, please. Oh, and they do a hackathon before each IETF, and this hackathon looked at human rights, and they tried to detect on the internet where censorship was happening. And of course, that's kind of iffy because you don't really want to publish where you see censorship happening because then maybe it'll get harder to find that. But they did actually had that in the hackathon, like looking at what parts of the internet are being filtered and that sort of thing. So that was kind of cool. Let's see, next slide. DNS operations, next slide. So these are some of the drafts. I don't know how am I on time? Okay, I'm hurrying. We'll skip through these, but there's some of the drafts that are going on in DNS operations. And we can, so I just put Babel in here because I went to the working group, but you can go to the next slide. These are some drafts being worked there. Again, it's the routing protocol for HomeNet. Next slide. Okay, so this is where you can look for more information on what's going on at the IETF, the different BOFs, the different working groups, and then next slide. This is what you can do if you are going to your first IETF, or if you are, let me know, and I'll be happy to make goofy noises with you and like laugh at people in the back of the room or whatever. Go next slide. And this is a shot of eclipse totality directly from my camera. I don't know what that was about. Anyway, questions?
Yes, middle mic, go ahead.
Kathy, David Huberman, Oracle, ARIN AC. First off, thank you for a wonderful presentation, as you always give. It's one of the highlights of these meetings for me. I have two questions for you. Here in 2017, and it's October now, there's been this effort called CASM, Central Address Space Management. And from what I've seen, it's the operators of a network in China who think IPAM, IP Address Management Software, is interesting or difficult or something. And they think they'd like to standardize some things. I have always had a little bit of a problem with that because one solution does not fit all in IPAM. But I'm an IP address weenie. I've spent 18 years here in the ARIN and the RR community. I don't spend a lot of time in the IETF community because I'm not a protocol person. Do we need to worry about things like when some person just has an idea that works for them and they want to try and make a standard out of it? Is this something that we need to pay attention to?
I don't think that CASM met in Prague. I mean, I went at least once, and it does seem like I can't imagine it's going to go very far, but I have been trying to keep an eye on it. Okay. I don't think that we need to worry about it, really. And I can't imagine that it's going to, I personally can't imagine it's going to get very far, but I'll definitely keep an eye on it.
Cool.
What, John?
So remember that IETF protocols are standard ways of doing things that people use or don't use. So if the real question is, do we need to pay attention to it because they'll adopt a protocol that forgets about V6 or doesn't know that there's two types of ASNs? In that regard, even if we don't end up using the protocol, it's certainly worth making sure there's people in the room so they don't develop a broken one.
Right.
Lee, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond also to that. Oh, Lee Howard, Retevia, and IETF, active participant, Internet Architecture Board. At the CASM BOF, there wasn't, the impression was that there was not a clear enough problem statement, but so it doesn't, until there's a clear problem and an approach to go forward, nothing is going to happen, but there might be further work on developing a problem statement. I will also note that I believe there was staff from all 5 RIRs in the room at the time, so I'm sure that our good friends at ARIN and the other RIRs will let us know if we need to pay attention.
Cool, thank you.
Well, and they didn't form a working group, did they?
No.
I didn't think
No, because there was not a clear enough statement. There was interest, there was activity, but there wasn't enough to charter a working group.
Yeah, because I was at the BOF. It was
Okay.
like, yeah.
A follow-up on CHASM?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As far as I understand, they didn't meet in Prague. They meet the previous AETF.
Yeah.
There was a message sent to the mailing list asking for an initial charter for a potential working group. But the product of that, the sort of charter that came out of it, didn't convince anyone. It's just too short, it's just too vague, just imprecise, to use a word.
And that's how the BOF was too.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I don't think anyone needs to worry about it. I still feel that the problem itself is interesting. And I would actually encourage people who are interested to, to contribute to this potential charter. But as far as it is right now, I don't think it's going very far either.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any follow-up on CHASM? Anything else? No? Okay, thank you.
And so, pivoting for just a moment, this is ARIN 40. We've been meeting here for almost 20 years now. And one of the themes that's always been present is that the IETF has had challenges with operator input. Never forget Randy Bush calling it the IVTF, the Vendor Task Force.
Well, yeah.
Today, in 2017, are we doing better on that? Are operators participating more in the IETF, and are we getting more relevant input, in your opinion, in your view, into the workings?
In your view, Kathy?
I think it's about the same. I mean, there are operators participating. There's quite a few of them, but whether I think it's about the same.
Thank you.
I am closing the microphones because we're running out of time, so I'm going to take the last few comments. Go ahead, Kevin.
So Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. You mentioned TLS, Kathy, and I've been watching it, and there's been a big growth in TLS this year, a big push towards it, specifically 1.2 and now 1.3. But from our community's perspective, the big issue with TLS is that it needs IPs and it needs lots of them. If it's done old school, if it's done with SNI, which you don't need lots of IPs, but then you get a digital divide that goes on. When I look at the statistics for my customers, 0.01% of customers or 0.1% of customers are using devices that don't support SNI. But as we go into other regions, into other markets, and into other countries, that number grows and grows and grows. So just I'm just wondering if that's still being discussed, the digital divide that goes on when technology grows. And in this case, now we've run out of V4. So it wasn't a problem before. We could just add IPs and add IPs and add IPs so that it was 100% compatible. But that way of dealing with it, of the 100% compatibility, seems to be going, and just for everybody in the room, that means that customers aren't able to reach encrypted websites because we don't have V4. V6 solves it again, but they don't have V6. If they had V6, they wouldn't have this problem with their devices either.
Well, I think that they're both issues. I spent a lot of time with the people who are just desperately trying to make their data centers work, and that's one of the issues as well. Like, if, there's just a lot of issues with it, but they are discussing the other issues as well, so.
Thank you.
And remote participant?
Yes, remote participant. Question from Kevin Ott of Flying Penguin Technologies. He'd like to know, why does the IETF not recommend ULA?
Why did the IETF not recommend ULA?
That's what I got.
Yeah, well, I think most of it is because there's so many addresses. Why don't you just use a real address? I mean, why not just use a global address? Lee, do you have a?
Lee Howard.
Lee, do you want to respond to the remote?
I want to respond to that question, this time as Lee Howard, co-chair of V6 Ops.
Yeah, thanks,
So
Lee.
there's a common with the part of the big argument, I think, is that many people believe, some people believe, that using ULA encourages the use of NAT.
Right.
Because it's like private addressing, so if you allow ULA, then people are going to do network prefix translation or other NAT technology.
And the IETF has historically been end-to-end, no NAT.
I don't think there's a formal recommendation against ULA. I think that, but there's also no recommendation ever to use ULA.
Right.
Understood. Okay, and final remark over here, far right, Mike.
David Lawrence, Akamai. I just wanted to provide a different viewpoint on the role of operator feedback into the IETF.
Oh,
I'd
great.
say
Oh, yeah.
that the situation has actually been improving. It is, as witnessed the TLS conversation on static Diffie-Hellman, operational considerations factor pretty heavily into a lot of discussions about ongoing protocol development, including through the ossification of the middleware and whether the end-to-end principle can ever hope to work in the modern internet and so on. So
Well,
it's been an improving situation, I'd say.
That participation has been fostered by a few people in the IETF and actually brought the issues to their attention so that they would come and participate, and it's really been great.
Yeah, I agree.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to thank Kathy for her report.
I think that's the most questions ever.
I will just say the board this morning appointed Kathy to the same role for next year. She's our 2018 IETF reporter.